At midnight, my grandson called me from the hospital and said, "My stepfather broke my arm. He claimed I fell, and my mom believed him." When I walked in, the surgeon suddenly froze his face, turning pale, as he realized who was standing in front of him. He turned to the staff and said, "Everyone stop. I know who this is." The stepfather stood there pale with fear. I stayed silent, didn't argue, but quietly began planning how to make him pay. Welcome to my journey of justice. This plan leaves no room for mistakes hit. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Some details have been fictionalized to enhance the experience. Any similarities are purely coincidental, but the message of protection carries deep meaning. Now, let's open the file on this stepfather. Silence in Forest Hills at midnight is a physical weight, a heavy curtain smothering the ancient oaks and the distant hum of the Nashville interstate. For a man like me who spent 40 years navigating the microscopic canyons of the human brain, silence usually meant the anesthesia was holding or the monitor had gone flat. But tonight that silence was shattered by a frequency that didn't belong. It wasn't the rhythmic ticking of my hallway clock. It was the sharp vibration of a secondary phone inside my nightstand drawer, a device whose number I had given to only one other person. I didn't fumble for the light. Decades of neurosurgery have wired a specific reflex into my system. When the crisis call comes, the brain bypasses sleep and shifts into high-definition clarity. My eyes snapped open. My feet found the floor before my mind even processed the caller ID. In my world, thinking happens on the way. Movement happens now. I slid the phone from the drawer. The screen illuminated the deep lines on my face, a map of a life spent in high-stakes environments. The name on the screen was Caradoc. "Talk to me," I said, my voice gravelly but devoid of tremor. On the other end, the silence was punctuated by the sterile chirping of medical monitors. When Caradoc spoke, his voice was low and controlled. It was the tone of a 16-year-old who had run out of tears, leaving only the cold facts of a tragedy. "Grandpa," he whispered, "I'm at Vanderbilt. My arm. He broke my arm." I felt a cold surge of adrenaline, the kind that sharpens the vision rather than blurring it. I didn't ask how or why. I already knew the how was a man named Edric Brandwell, a detective who had been casting a shadow over my family for a year. He told the nurse I fell down the stairs. Caradoc continued, his voice cracking. "He was so convincing. And Mom, Nadine, she just stood there. She didn't say anything." The mention of my daughter Nadine stung, but I filed that emotion away in a sterilized compartment for later. Right now, the surgical field was open and the patient was bleeding. "Which unit?" I asked, already pulling on the dark slacks I keep ready for emergencies. "ER Bay 6. They're waiting for the ortho resident." "Hey, stay quiet," I commanded, my voice firm. "Don't sign anything. Don't agree to a story. I'm 4 minutes from being dressed and 15 from the parking garage. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Hold the line. I'm coming." I moved with efficient grace. I wasn't rushing. I was being precise. Dark sweater, leather jacket, wallet, primary phone, and the secondary lifeline. I grabbed my keys and stepped into the humid Tennessee night. As I backed my sedan out of the Forest Hills driveway, my headlights swept across the manicured lawns. My mind was already scrolling through a digital ledger I had maintained on my phone since last September. I had started the record the evening Caradoc showed up with a split lip and a story about a baseball that didn't align with the laws of physics. I hadn't pushed him then. I had simply cleaned the wound and watched his eyes dart toward the door every time a car passed. But once the door closed, I opened a secure notes app. Entry 1, September 12th. Laceration lower lip. Pattern suggests a knuckle. Subject evasive. Monitoring. Since then, the file had grown. Entry 14, Caradoc stopped posting photography on social media because Edric called it pretentious. Oh, entry 22, rib bruises claimed to be from the gym, though the pattern suggested a boot. Entry 39, the sudden flat tone in Nadine's voice. I recognized these shifts from years of seeing domestic control in my clinic. I had 41 entries, timestamps, anatomical descriptions written with the detachment of a coroner. I had been building a case while everyone thought I was just a retired man tending to his garden. The streets of Nashville were ghosts. I pushed through Green Hills traffic lights blinking yellow. I wasn't driving like a panicked grandfather. I was a man on a mission to reclaim what belongs to me. Every turn was calculated. I thought about Edric Branwell, a chameleon who was charming at the country club and devastating at home, protected by a badge and a thin blue line. He had dismantled Caradoc's world piece by piece. Tonight, the final brick was a shattered radius. The neurosurgeon's reflex applies to life as much as the operating room. Assess the damage. Stabilize. Remove the pathology. Tonight, Edric was the pathology, and I was the scalpel. As the red sign for Vanderbilt emergency room appeared, I didn't slow. I felt a grim satisfaction in the weight of the evidence in my pocket. I wasn't arriving as a victim's relative. I was the primary investigator of a crime 9 months in the making. I steered into the ambulance bay, my eyes scanning the perimeter. The sterile light of the ER spilled onto the asphalt. Directly under the no parking sign, a Nashville PD patrol car sat idling its lights, casting a fractured blue glow against the glass. I turned off the engine. I sat in the stillness for 4 seconds, a ritual from my days at the scrub sink. 1 second to breathe, 1 second to focus, 1 second to commit, 1 second to become the man who handles the situation. I opened the door. The smell of ozone and antiseptic met me. The operation had begun. The sliding glass doors of the Vanderbilt emergency department hissed open, releasing a pressurized gust of clinical air, a sharp mix of antiseptic and floor wax. I stepped into the sterile white glare, my senses instantly calibrating to the environment I had navigated for 40 years. I didn't look at the directory or the triage desk. My eyes bypassed the frantic activity of the night shift and locked onto the central nursing hub. The first thing I saw was not the staff. It was Edric Branwell. Edric was leaning against the laminate counter with a practiced predatory ease. He wasn't in uniform, but the gold shield clipped to his belt was positioned to catch the harsh overhead light, a deliberate signal of authority. His posture was controlled, shoulders squared, head tilted, as he spoke to a young nurse in a low, soothing baritone. It was the stance of a man who had arrived first to mark his territory and establish a narrative before the truth could surface. As I crossed the floor, Edric turned. A subtle shift occurred in the detective's face, not fear, but a narrowing of the eyes, the cold recognition of a rival breaching the perimeter. The calm mask remained intact, but the hand resting near the badge tightened into a fist. I didn't slow. I walked past Edric as if the man were a piece of hospital furniture, heading straight for the charge nurse Marlene Ashby. Marlene had been at Vanderbilt long enough to remember my first day as a resident. She looked up from her monitors, her glasses sliding down her nose. Dr. Hargrove, it's been a while since you walked these halls after midnight. I'm here for my grandson Caradoc. I said, my voice a steady vibration that commanded the space without rising in volume. I need the intake notes and the status of the attending. Marlene's eyes flicked toward Edric, then back to me. That half-second hesitation was all the data I needed. I saw the conflict, the weight of the gold shield, and the silent pressure Edric was exerting on the staff. Before she could answer, a door to the inner corridor swung open and Dr. Gavin Marsh stepped out. Gavin, the head of the ER, and one of my former mentees looked exhausted. He didn't smile. He simply nodded toward a small glass-walled consult room. Raymond, a word, Marsh said, his tone clipped. Inside the room, the noise of the ER faded into an underwater hum. Gavin stood with his back to the glass, blocking Edric's view. A mandatory report was filed the moment the boy mentioned the stairs, Raymond. The injuries don't match the story. We found a grip pattern on the upper arm, finger-shaped contusions, suggesting violent wrenching, not a tumble. The DCS notification went out at 12:15 a.m. My jaw set like granite. And Edric, he beat the ambulance by 3 minutes, Gavin said, rubbing his eyes. He didn't wait for a social worker. He identified himself as a detective first and the father second. He's been managing the response since they rolled the gurney in. He told the triage staff he was off duty, but was securing the scene for his family. He's been in the ears of the residents and security filing the official statement before the intake nurse could finish the vitals. He told the staff he's the boy's father. He's the stepfather. I corrected my voice like a sharpening stone. And he's a subject of interest in a file I've been keeping for 9 months. It doesn't matter to the staff out there, Raymond. To them, he's the man with the badge. He's been helpful, which is the most dangerous thing a man like that can be in a trauma center. He's controlling the information flow. He even convinced a social work intern that this was just a family misunderstanding involving a rebellious teen. I looked through the glass. Edric was speaking to a patrol officer near the entrance, the same one I had seen in the car outside. They were laughing quietly, a display of brotherhood that sent a chill through my chest. The hospital was being turned into a fortress of silence. "Where is Caradoc?" I asked. "Bay 6, Gavin replied. "But there's a problem. Edric told the charge nurse that all family communication must go through him first. He's listed himself as primary next of kin and the sole point of contact. He claimed the boy is unstable and that seeing anyone else might trigger a psychological episode. He's isolating him. Yet standard pathology of a controller, I whispered. He's using the badge to legally kidnap his own stepson within a state-funded hospital. He's playing a dangerous game, Raymond, but right now he has the appearance of the law on his side. If you walk into that bay without his permission, he can have security remove you for interfering with medical directives. And with his friends sitting right outside, it won't be pretty. I felt the weight of the digital ledger in my pocket. 41 entries of documented abuse photos of bruises and timestamps from late-night calls. I had the evidence, but Edric had the immediate authority. The tumor had metastasized into the very system meant to excise it. He thinks he's the only one who knows how to navigate the system. I said, my voice becoming dangerously calm. I turned toward the door. He's forgotten I've been in these hallways since before he learned how to pin that shield to his chest. "What are you going to do?" Gavin asked. I didn't answer. I stepped back into the sterile light of the ER. Edric was waiting, watching me with a cold, triumphant smirk. The detective believed the game was over. I ignored him again, but I didn't head for Bay 6. Not yet. I walked back to Marlene at the nursing station. I didn't ask for permission or the chart. I simply placed my old hospital ED badge, the one that still held emeritus status, on the counter, and looked her in the eye. "Marlene," I said, "get me the phone for the chief of medicine. Now." The battle for Bay 6 had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't going to use a scalpel. I was going to use the hierarchy. Edric Branwell is a detective. He is trained to control a scene, to dictate the perimeter, and to overwhelm the civilian mind with the weight of the law. He knows how to use that gold shield to silence dissent. But I spent 40 years in neurosurgery. I know how to control a room where the stakes are life and death. I have commanded teams of specialists who moved only on my word. That night, Edric had a badge. I had something that cannot be taken away. I had the loyalty of the walls themselves. I didn't let the silence between me and Edric fester. I turned to Dr. Gavin Marsh, my voice dropping into the precise clinical tone that once made residents tremble. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a surgical directive. "Gavin," I said, my eyes fixed on the younger doctor, "document the fracture pattern explicitly. I want the mechanical vector of the force recorded. Note the absence of palm abrasions. Note the specific spiral nature of the break. Then contact Vanderbilt's child protective team immediately, not DCS, the internal hospital CPT. I want a forensic pediatrician in this bay within 20 minutes. Gavin nodded, the exhaustion in his face replaced by a flicker of the sharp intern I had once trained. "I've alerted them, Raymond, but Edric, he's been blocking the social worker." "He can block a social worker," I countered. "He cannot block a chief emeritus requesting a peer review consultation on suspected non-accidental trauma. If he tries, he's interfering with a mandated reporting protocol in a Tier 1 trauma center. Let him explain that to his commander tomorrow morning." I walked back to the nursing station. Marlene Ashby was there, her hands hovering over the keyboard. Her shoulders were rigid. I didn't approach her with an order. I approached her with a question that acknowledged her expertise. "Marlene," I said softly, "how long have you been documenting his interactions with the staff tonight?" The typing stopped. Marlene looked up, and for the first time, the professional mask slipped. There was cold anger in her eyes. "Since the second he walked in Dr. Hargrove. I saw how he spoke to the triage nurse. I've been recording every time he's intercepted a staff member, every timestamp, every quote." "That's good," I said. "Vanderbilt didn't build this department on the word of off-duty detectives. We built it on data. Exercise the safety protocol, Marlene. Direct Detective Branwell to the family waiting area. Tell him it's for the formal evaluation process." Marlene hesitated, flicking her gaze toward Edric, who was still looming near the entrance. "He's going to cite his status, Raymond. Then remind him that under hospital policy, the treatment area is for patients and designated caregivers only during a CPT evaluation. Since there is a discrepancy in the mechanism of injury, he is no longer a designated caregiver until cleared. He's a witness, and witnesses wait in the lobby." Marlene stood up, straightened her scrubs, and walked toward Edric. I watched from the shadows. I saw Edric straighten his hand, going instinctively to the badge on his belt. The exchange was brief. Edric's face darkened, his jaw tightening. He searched the room for me. When he found me, the look wasn't one of a concerned father. It was a promise of retribution. But the rules of the hospital were older than Edric's career. Under the eyes of security guards who had known me for years, Edric had no choice. He turned and walked toward the waiting area, his heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the tile. Marlene walked back, exhaling a long-held breath. "Dr. Hargrove," she whispered, "I've been waiting for someone to do that for 2 hours." "You were prepared before I got here, Marlene. The timestamps. You knew. Dr. Marsh told us who was coming," she replied. "He told the staff that if you were on your way, we needed to clear the path. We just needed a reason to push back against the badge. You gave us the hierarchy. I didn't offer thanks. In this world, the work was the thanks." I turned toward the blue curtains of Bay 6. The air here felt colder, more concentrated. I reached out and pulled back the heavy fabric. The room was small, lit by a harsh fluorescent light. Caradoc wasn't lying down. He was sitting hunched in the far corner of the bed, his back pressed against the plastic wall. His left arm was in a temporary cardboard splint, held against his chest by a white sling. The boy looked skeletal. His eyes, usually bright with his photography, were flat and hyper-vigilant. They were fixed on the entrance, waiting for the threat to return. When Caradoc realized it was me, his frame shuddered. He didn't cry. He just stared, his chest rising and falling in jagged increments. The boy who had spent 9 months hiding a phone in his shoe, who had learned to use social media in code, and who had let his own bones snap just to escape, was finally in a room where the door could be locked. "It's just us, Caradoc," I said, my voice an anchoring weight. "The detective is in the lobby, the door is guarded, the field is clear." Caradoc looked at me, then at the splinted arm. A tremor ran through his fingers. "He's not going to let me leave, Grandpa. He told me. As soon as the x-rays are done, we're going home. He said you couldn't do anything." I walked to the side of the bed. I didn't touch him yet. I knew about the anatomy of fear. You don't touch a wounded animal until it knows the predator has left. "He's wrong," I said, my voice as certain as a heartbeat. "He thinks his badge is a master key. He's forgotten that this hospital is mine. You aren't going back to that house tonight. Not tonight, and not ever again." Caradoc finally let his head drop against his good knee. The silence in Bay 6 was no longer the heavy silence of the Forest Hills night. It was the silence of a ceasefire. I stood over him, the surgeon becoming the guardian. The hierarchy was holding. For now, the walls were ours. The sound Caradoc makes when I pull back that curtain is not crying. It is a ragged, hollow exhale, the sound of someone who has held a crushing weight for too long and has finally been given permission to put it down. In 40 years of neurosurgery, I've heard that sound from families when a crisis finally breaks, but hearing it from my own blood felt like a physical blow to my chest. I didn't remain standing. I knew the psychology of the room. To a boy who had been intimidated for months, a standing adult was just another tower of authority. I grabbed a plastic molded chair and pulled it close to the gurney. I sat down, adjusting my position until I was level with Caradoc. We were at the same eye level now, 2 men in a storm, neither one looming over the other. "Tell me what happened tonight," I said, my voice stripped of the professional ice I had used on Edric. "Start from dinner. Don't leave anything out. Just give me the sequence." I leaned back, my hands resting on my knees, offering my complete attention. I didn't steer the narrative or interrupt with emotional outbursts. I simply listened as the truth began to leak out in jagged increments. Caradoc started with dinner, a normal Tuesday that felt thin with tension. Then came the phrase, a simple comment he made about a photography project for social media. Edric decided the tone was disrespectful. He didn't shout. He simply laid his fork down with a precise click and told Caradoc they needed to discuss attitude in the hallway. The hallway was where the geography of the house changed. Caradoc described the transition from the light of the dining room to the shadows. He spoke about the grip, the way Edric's hand clamped onto his upper arm, like a vice fingers digging into the muscle until the bone felt the pressure. Nadine, his mother, had stood in the doorway. She hadn't screamed. She had watched her face, a mask of frozen compliance, saying nothing as the discipline crossed the line into a fracture. Then came the drive to Vanderbilt. Caradoc described Edric's voice in the car, calm, almost tender. Edric had spent 20 minutes explaining to Caradoc exactly what he had done to cause his own fall. He had rehearsed the story of the slick hardwood steps until it sounded like a memory. The gaslighting was as systematic as the physical assault. I listened, my mind categorizing details into a mental medical chart. When he finished, I kept my voice steady. "I need to ask 3 clinical questions, Caradoc. Answer them as clearly as you can." The boy nodded, clutching the hospital sheet. "First dates. When was the last time something like this happened? Not a break, but an impact." "On. krand. 3 weeks ago, Caradoc whispered. The bruise on my ribs. He told the coach I was clumsy during soccer practice. Second, has this ever left marks that someone at school might have noticed? I wore long sleeves all through April. He said, a flash of intelligence returning to his eyes. Even when it was 80 degrees. The art teacher asked once, but Edric had already emailed the school saying I had a skin rash. He's always one step ahead. Third, did he ever mention my name during these sessions? Caradoc looked at his splinted arm. He told me you were an old man who lived in the past. He said if I ever told you he'd make sure Mom lost everything. He said he had the badge and you just had a garden. I felt a cold anger, but I kept it out of my eyes. I placed a hand on his good shoulder. You did everything right tonight. Keeping that phone hidden for 9 months took more discipline than most adults possess. You were exactly right. What happens now? He asked, fear finally breaking through. He's still out there. He's going to come back. Now I make some calls, I said, standing up. And while I do, nobody gets near you. Not the nurses and certainly not him. That's not a hope. That is a fact. This room is a fortress. I turned to leave my mind calculating which judge to wake up. But as I reached for the curtain, my gaze fell on his right wrist. The boy was wearing the rugged black smartwatch I had given him for his 16th birthday. The screen was still lit with a faint blue glow. I froze, remembering the specific features of that pro version. Caradoc, I whispered, stepping back. The watch, has it been recording? Caradoc looked at his wrist, then at me. A small, trembling smile touched the corners of his mouth, the first sign of the boy I used to know. I triggered the voice memo when we got to the hallway, he said. It's been running for 2 hours. It caught the whole drive. Everything he said about the stairs, it's all on the cloud. I looked at the small screen. The recording icon was a tiny pulsing red dot, a digital heartbeat. Edric had the badge and I had the hierarchy. But the boy had the one thing that would burn the house down. The truth recorded in the perpetrator's own calm voice. Don't touch it, I commanded. Keep it running. I'm going to get the forensic team. The operation just changed. We aren't just defending anymore. We're going on the offensive. I stepped out of the bay, the curtain clicking shut. The air in the ER felt different. The predator was still in the lobby, but the prey had just turned into the lead witness. Caradoc looks at the watch, then at me. He doesn't answer right away. His eyes drift to the sterile floor, as if searching for the right frequency to broadcast the truth. But before I tell you what he said, you must understand something. I did not arrive at Vanderbilt tonight as a grandfather reacting to a crisis. I had been preparing for this moment for 9 months. In neurosurgery, you don't wait for the hemorrhage to start. You look for the arterial weakness long before the vessel bursts. The first time I met Edric Branwell was 16 months ago at a dinner Nadine hosted. Most fathers look for a firm handshake. I looked for inconsistencies. Edric arrived 12 minutes late, a calculated delay to make his entrance the center of gravity. His story about a stalled precinct vehicle was too detailed to be spontaneous. Within 20 minutes, he wasn't asking about Caradoc's hobbies. He was asking about my hospital privileges, my retirement assets, and the legal structure of my estate. I watched Nadine. She was happy, but it was the brittle happiness of someone working very hard to appear so. She checked Edric's expression before finishing every sentence. I've seen that look on patients trying to hide pain while their vitals tell a different story. Entry 1 in my digital ledger happened 9 months ago. Caradoc showed up at my house on a Saturday. It was 84 degrees, yet he wore a heavy hoodie. I noticed the subtle hitch in his shoulder when he reached for water. When I asked him to help in the garage, he spun a story about falling off his bicycle, a report with all the right details but in the wrong places. He described the gravel and the speed, but there wasn't a single scratch on his palms. You don't fall off a bike at 10 miles an hour without scraping your hands. You only get a bone bruise on the shoulder if someone slams you into a doorframe. I didn't call the police. I opened a secure note instead. Entry 1, October 12th. Contusion left deltoid. Mechanism manual force. Subject using rehearsed deflection. Monitoring. Thanksgiving was a study in atmospheric pressure. Caradoc was unusually silent. Twice I asked Nadine a direct question, and twice Edric answered for her, his voice smooth and proprietary. When I invited Caradoc into the kitchen, Edric stood up immediately. He didn't say he was joining us. He just occupied the space. He only sat back down when Nadine touched his arm, a silent plea he ignored for 3 seconds before complying. Entry, November 19th, 2024. Subject C showing social withdrawal. Subject E manifesting gatekeeping behavior, level of control escalating. Then came Christmas, or rather the lack of it. Nadine called 10 days before her voice flat. She told me they were simplifying the holidays and staying home. No dinner, no gift exchange. It was the sound of a perimeter being closed. The isolation phase of the pathology had begun. By January, Caradoc's texts grew sparse. The content was neutral, almost robotic. I recognized the blankness of someone composing messages they know will be read by a controller first. He stopped sharing photography on social media. He was being erased one digital footprint at a time. In March, I tested the wall Edric had built. I arranged a private lunch with Caradoc, picking him up from art class before Edric could arrive. We sat in a corner booth in Green Hills. I didn't push for a confession. Instead, I slid a small folded piece of paper across the table. "This is a line only you have," I told him. "No one else knows it exists. It's a secondary phone in my nightstand. Use it if you need an exit." I watched him. He didn't put the paper in his wallet. He tucked it into the interior breast pocket of his jacket, the one closest to his heart, the one Edric was least likely to check during a pat-down hug. That was the moment I knew Caradoc was a prisoner. Entry 44 was logged 3 days before the phone rang at midnight. Caradoc stopped by for 20 minutes to drop off a book. His face was tired in a way that is different from ordinary exhaustion. It was the fatigue of a soldier who had been on the front lines too long. He didn't stay for tea. He just looked at me, a silent communication that the structural failure was imminent. "I have 44 entries, Caradoc," I said now in the trauma bay. 44 dates. 44 reasons I was not surprised when that phone rang at midnight. The only question was whether I was ready enough to handle the aftermath. I looked at the boy on the bed. The present rushed back the hum of monitors, the smell of antiseptic, the red pulsing dot on the smartwatch. The history was logged, and the trajectory of the past 9 months had led us to this specific moment. Caradoc didn't look surprised that I had been keeping a ledger. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who realized his SOS signal had been received months ago, and the rescue fleet had been hovering just offshore the entire time. "I'm ready, Grandpa," he whispered. "I've been ready since March." I stood up, the weight of the phone in my pocket, feeling like a loaded weapon. The flashback was over. The diagnostic phase was complete. Now it was time for the primary surgical intervention. Caradoc looks at the watch, then at me. There is a heavy tectonic silence in the room, the kind that precedes a massive shift in the Earth's crust. Slowly, with a grim deliberation that looks far too old for a 16-year-old boy, he pulls up the sleeve of his hospital gown. The motion is shaky, hindered by the cardboard splint on his left arm, but his right hand is steady. He taps the screen of the rugged smartwatch I gave him for his birthday. The blue light reflects in his pupils, casting a cold digital glow over his pale features. "I didn't just start recording tonight, Grandpa," he whispers. His voice is a thin wire vibrating with a frequency of pure, unadulterated truth. "I've been waiting. I researched the emergency recording features 3 months ago. I found a way to trigger the voice memo with a haptic shortcut, just 3 taps on the side of the bezel, no screen light, no sound, just a silent witness." He scrolls through the local storage of the device. 3 icons appear on the small display, 3 audio files, 3 months. Each one is a digital ghost, a fragment of a nightmare captured in a high-fidelity format. Caradoc doesn't explain what they are. He doesn't have to. The look in his eyes tells me that these files are the reason he stopped smiling in January. They are the reason he stopped posting his life on social media and started living like a ghost in his own hallway. The first one is from February. Caradoc says, his finger hovering over the play button. It was the first time I actually witnessed it. The first time he didn't care if I was in the next room. He presses play. I lean in my clinical detachment, working at maximum capacity. I listen to the first 2 seconds of the recording. I hear Edric's voice, not the smooth, authoritative baritone of the detective in the lobby, but a jagged, distorted snarl. Then I hear Nadine's voice, a sound of muffled impact, followed by a sharp, choked intake of breath. It is a sound I will not describe in detail even to myself, but it is sufficient. It is unambiguous. It is the definitive sound of a predator claiming territory. I reach out and tap the screen to stop the file. I have heard enough. In surgery, once you've identified the malignancy, you don't keep cutting just to see how deep it goes. You stop and prepare for the excision. He hits her too. Caradoc chokes out the words, finally breaking through the dam. "When I'm not supposed to be home, when he thinks I'm at the library or at practice, I recorded 3 times because those were the only times I could reach the watch in time without him seeing. He's so fast, Grandpa. He's always watching. But he didn't see the watch. He thought it was just a toy. I sit completely still. I don't move a muscle. I don't allow my hands to clench or my jaw to tighten. It isn't because I have nothing to feel. It is because what I feel, the white-hot, cold-burning rage of a father and a grandfather, has no place in this room tonight. Emotion is a distraction during a delicate procedure. Right now, I need to be the vessel for the evidence, not the victim of the trauma. I process the information with the same cold analytical precision I use to map out brain tumors. "How long have you been carrying this alone, Caradoc?" I ask. My voice is low and anchoring weight in the sterile room. "Since you gave me the watch, Grandpa." The boy replies, his eyes finally welling, with the tears he has been suppressing for 90 days. "Every time I put it on in the morning, I felt like I was wearing a wire. I felt like if I could just get enough of him on the cloud, you'd believe me. I was so scared you'd think I was just being a difficult kid, that you'd believe the badge over me." I place my hand on Caradoc's good shoulder. I hold it there for exactly 1 second, a firm grounding pressure that says more than any verbal reassurance could. It is a promise of protection, a transfer of strength. "I have never believed the badge over you," I say, "and I never will." I stand up, my shadow stretching across the small trauma bay. The dynamic of the entire night has shifted. We are no longer just documenting a broken arm. We are holding the keys to a double felony investigation. The 3 files on that watch are the smoking guns that Edric Branwell thinks he has successfully buried under his layer of professional charm. "I'm going to need to borrow this for a while," I say, reaching for the watch. I remove the device with surgical care, unbuckling the silicone strap, as if I were handling a delicate graft. I hold the watch in my palm for a moment, feeling the slight warmth of the battery. It is a small piece of technology, but in this moment, it is the most powerful weapon in the city of Nashville. I slip it into my interior jacket pocket, right next to my own phone and my medical ID. "What are you going to do?" Caradoc asks, his voice trembling but curious. "I'm going to ensure the correct sequence of events," I reply. "I'm going to make sure the right people hear what I just heard. You stay here. The nurses are coming back in with the pediatric specialist. Don't say a word about the watch to anyone else. Not yet." I step toward the curtain. I pause, looking back at my grandson one last time. Caradoc looks smaller now, but also lighter. The secret is out. The burden has been transferred to a man who is more than capable of carrying it. I draw the curtain behind me. The sound of the plastic rings sliding across the metal rod is the only noise in the corridor. I step out into the hallway, a long, white, empty expanse of linoleum and fluorescent light. I stand perfectly still for 4 seconds. I'm not standing here to collect my thoughts or to calm my heart. My heart rate is a steady rhythmic 60 beats per minute. I am standing here because I am running a mental simulation. I am calculating the trajectory of my next 3 moves. I am determining who to call, which hallway to take to avoid Edric, and how to trigger the hospital's legal counsel without alerting the police department's internal network first. The hallway is silent, but the air is charged with the impending storm. I am the man who spent 40 years navigating the most complex systems in the human body, and I am now navigating the most corrupt system in my city, and I have exactly what I need to dismantle it. I begin to walk, my boots clicking with a rhythmic military precision. The operation has entered the 2nd phase. Edric Branwell finds me at the far end of the corridor near the stairwell, exactly where the sterile fluorescent hum of the main ER fades into a low yellow dimness. This is a dead zone in the hospital's architectural nervous system, a place where the janitorial carts are stored and where the security cameras have a convenient blind spot. I know he will do this. I chose to stand here for that very reason. In a surgical theater, you control the lighting and the tools. In a confrontation with a predator, you control the geography. I hear his boots before I see him. It's a heavy rhythmic stride, the walk of a man who is used to floors yielding to his authority. When he rounds the corner, he doesn't rush. He approaches with the measured predatory calm of a detective, accustomed to managing a scene until it fits his preferred narrative. The gold shield on his belt catches a stray sliver of light, a jagged spark in the gloom. "Dr. Hargrove," Edric says. His voice is a smooth, practiced baritone, the kind he likely uses to put nervous witnesses at ease before he traps them. "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding tonight. Emotions are running high. That's understandable given the circumstances." I don't move. I stand with my back to the heavy steel door of the stairwell, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my leather jacket. I keep my breathing rhythmic, 60 beats per minute. I am a statue of clinical observation. You're making this much harder than it needs to be. Raymond, he continues stepping into my personal space, an old interrogation tactic designed to trigger a flight response. Caradoc had an accident, a clumsy fall on some hardwood steps. These things happen to teenagers. It's unfortunate, but it's a family matter. It doesn't need to become a municipal one. I look him directly in the eye. I don't blink. In the operating room, flinching is a fatal error. The mandatory report was filed the moment Caradoc arrived at triage. I say my voice as level as a horizon line. The DCS notification has already gone out. Vanderbilt's child protective team has been contacted and is currently on site. These are not things I initiated, Edric. These are things that happen here, because that is simply what happens here. The system is automated. It doesn't care about your rank. Edric's smile doesn't vanish, but it hardens, turning into something brittle and synthetic. He leans in closer, the scent of stale coffee and expensive cologne radiating off him. Let's be realistic. I've spent 22 years on the force in this city. I have relationships in every department of this system, from the DA's office to the social workers you're counting on. You're a retired surgeon with a personal grudge and a thin connection to the truth. Who do you think the intake judge is going to believe? At 3 a.m. a decorated detective or a grandfather who hasn't held a scalpel in 5 years? Ja staist na wulacidit bets. He taps the badge on his belt with a blunt finger. It's a silent punctuation mark, a reminder of the power he thinks he still wields within these walls. I have 3 audio recordings, I say. The silence that follows is absolute. The distant sound of a rolling gurney in the main hallway feels like it's miles away. Edric's finger stays frozen against the gold shield. I have 3 months of high-fidelity audio captured from a device you overlooked. I continue, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the low. Terrifying growl of a man who has finished the diagnostic phase and is now beginning the incision. I have 14 months of documented clinical observations with timestamps. I have a fracture pattern already noted by the orthopedic resident as being physically inconsistent with a fall down stairs. And right now as we speak, a child protective team physician is reviewing the imaging in Bay 6. They aren't looking for a story, Edric. They're looking at the physics of the break. Spiral fractures don't lie. They don't have relationships with the police department. I step forward, reversing the pressure, forcing him to shift his weight. What you have is a piece of stamped metal that is going to become a massive liability for your precinct before this night is over. You aren't securing a scene anymore. You are standing in a trauma center with a digital trail of domestic battery following you like a bloodstain. Edric's face changes. It's a subtle, terrifying transformation. The specific, rapid recalculation of a man who has just realized the field is not what he thought it was. The charm evaporates, replaced by a cold, hollow blankness. For a second, I see the man who gripped Caradoc's arm in the hallway. I see the pathology without the mask. You think you can bury me with a few voice memos? He whispers, his voice losing its baritone warmth, becoming a jagged hiss. I don't think, I reply. I know, in my profession we don't operate on thinks. We operate on evidence. And the evidence in my pocket is currently uploading to a secure server at the Chief of Medicine's office. If I don't walk back into that bay in 5 minutes, the sequence triggers automatically. It's a lie, the upload is manual, but in this lighting under this pressure, he can't afford to bet against me. He looks at me, his chest rising and falling in shallow, angry increments. He is looking for an opening, a way to use his physical size or his badge to reclaim the narrative. But he sees nothing but the flat, unyielding eyes of a man who has spent 40 years looking at the worst things the human body can endure. He realizes I am not afraid of him. And for a bully with a badge, that is the most dangerous realization of all. We're done here, I say. It isn't a question. It isn't a suggestion. It is a closing statement. Edric says nothing. He stands in the dim light of the far corridor, his shadow cast, long and distorted against the janitor's closet. He is a man who has just been stripped of his armor in a place where he thought he was king. I don't wait for his response. I don't give him the satisfaction of a final look. I turn my back on him, a deliberate act of dismissal, and walk toward the heavy steel door of the stairwell. I push it open, the screech of the hinges echoing through the dead zone. As I step into the concrete landing, I already have my primary phone in my hand. My thumb is hovering over the contact for the one man in Nashville who dislikes Edric Brandwell more than I do. A captain in internal affairs who owes me for a complicated spinal surgery I performed on his daughter 10 years ago. I don't look back. I don't need to. I know the sound of a man who has just lost the room. The operation has moved into the final decisive stage of the excision. The stairwell is a vertical concrete throat, amplifying the building's ventilation into a low roar. Here, between heavy fire doors, I am invisible to the hospital's internal politics. I lean against the cold masonry, my phone already dialing the first of 3 numbers that will dismantle Edric Brandwell's world. Constance Bellamy answers after 2 rings. Her voice is alert, suggesting she was not entirely asleep, or if she was, her mind was still working on a closing argument. Constance is a family law powerhouse who has spent 30 years navigating Tennessee's domestic statutes. She doesn't do small talk after midnight. Raymond, she says, her tone sharp. I assume this isn't about your garden. It's not, I reply. I deliver a 90-second summary with the economy of a surgical report. My grandson Caradoc is in Bay 6, spiral fracture, mandatory report filed. The perpetrator is Edric Brandwell, a detective using his badge to intercept staff. I have 3 audio files from a smartwatch and a ledger of 44 entries. I need emergency custody of my grandson and legal protection for his mother, tonight. Silence follows, then the sound of a pen scratching paper. Constance doesn't ask how I got the recordings. She knows me. The audio, she says. Is it unambiguous? Completely. It captures the assault and the intimidation. Send me everything now, Constance commands. The ledger and the files. I'll file through the emergency after hours court line immediately. I know the judge on call. If the fracture is as inconsistent as you say, we'll have an order by 4 a.m. Go. She hangs up. Efficiency is the highest form of respect in a crisis. I dial the second number, Denise Gadsden, the on-call social worker at Vanderbilt. Denise has seen the worst of humanity and responded with an unyielding sense of justice. Denise, it's Raymond Hargrove, I say. My grandson is in Bay 6. The mandatory report is filed. I need you to conduct your intake interview before his stepfather finds a way back into that room. He's already been removed once, but he's persistent. I just saw the notification. Denise replies, her voice tight with focus. Give me 8 minutes. I'm clearing a case in pediatrics and heading straight to your boy. If the detective blocks me, I'll trigger a security lockdown for the bay. Thank you, Denise. 8 minutes, Raymond. Stay out of the way. The third call is the most delicate. It requires authority that doesn't rely on hospital hierarchy. I scroll to a number saved 3 years ago during a police accountability conference. Inspector Virgil Dunmore, Internal Affairs, MNPD. Virgil hunts his own. It is a lonely profession that has made him a man of few words. He answers on the 4th ring. Nine Hargrove, Virgil says. It's 2 a.m. This better be a large problem for my office. It's both. I say, my voice a low, steady cadence. I have 3 audio recordings of a detective committing domestic violence and child endangerment. Edric Brandwell. He is currently at Vanderbilt ER using his shield to influence medical staff. He's off duty, and the fracture is physically inconsistent with his story. Virgil is silent for exactly 4 seconds. It is the silence of a man calculating the fallout of arresting one of his own in a public hospital. Brandwell, Virgil, finally says, he's been a ghost on my radar for 6 months. You have the audio, clear and encrypted. It caught the physical impact and the verbal threats. Send the files. Virgil says, the sound of a zipper sliding up a jacket audible. Right now, encrypted only. I'm getting dressed. I'll have a team from IA at the entrance in 20 minutes. Do not engage him again, Raymond. Let us handle the badge. I hang up. I stand on the concrete landing, my thumb tapping a final command to bulk, send the encrypted data to all 3 recipients. I check the time, 2:09 a.m. 3 calls, 47 minutes since I walked through the ER doors. In less than an hour, I have triggered a 3-pronged pincer movement. Constance is reading the files, preparing the legal cage. Denise is walking toward Bay 6 to secure testimony. Virgil is in his car bringing the internal hammer of the police department. For the first time since midnight, I am alone with the silence. The adrenaline is a cold current beneath my skin, but the diagnostic phase is over. The surgical plan is in motion. I look up at the ceiling, the gray concrete feeling like a sanctuary. I think about Nadine, my daughter. I imagine her sitting in the family waiting area, her hands clasped, waiting for a man who has spent a year convincing her she is powerless. I know I need to find her. I need to see her before the world collapses around her husband. But first I need to know exactly where she is. In a hospital this size, a person can be hidden in plain sight tucked into an alcove or a quiet corner. I need to locate her with the same precision I used to find the recordings. I reach for the door handle. The stairwell has served its purpose. It is time to return to the floor. The operation is moving into the final stage of containment. Marlene Ashby finds me just as I step out of the stairwell's heavy shadow. She delivers information the way she has delivered everything tonight, precisely without alarm, her face a map of clinical exhaustion and ironclad competence. Mr. Branwell's wife left the waiting area about 20 minutes ago. Marlene says her voice low enough to avoid carrying down the hall. I saw her walk toward the south corridor restrooms. She hasn't come back. The patrol officer near the vending machines didn't notice, but I did. Thank you, Marlene, I say. I head south. The hospital at 2:30 a.m. is a labyrinth of humming machines and distant echoing footsteps. The south corridor is quieter, a stretch of administrative offices that stay dark until dawn. I find the restroom door. It's heavy stainless steel and silent. When I push it open, the smell of industrial bleach and cold porcelain meets me. Nadine isn't standing at the sinks. She isn't hiding in a stall. She is sitting on the cold tile floor in the far corner, her back pressed against the white grout, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looks like a child who has been told to wait in a corner and has forgotten how to leave it. The fluorescent lights overhead flicker with a rhythmic buzzing pulse, casting a sickly pallor over her face. I don't offer a hand to help her up. I don't tell her that the floor is dirty or that she shouldn't be here. Instead, I do the only thing that can bridge the silence of the last 16 months. I sit down on the floor beside her. The tile is freezing, the cold seeping through my jeans and into my bones, but I don't move. I sit with my shoulders slumped, my hands resting on my knees, staring at the opposite wall just as she is. I say nothing. I am not a surgeon here. I am not a grandfather with a digital ledger. I am just a man sitting on a floor because his daughter is broken. Nadine begins to speak. She doesn't start because I asked a question. She starts because someone finally sat down long enough for her to feel the weight of her own words. It started 6 months after the wedding, she whispers. Her voice is thin like a frayed thread. The first time he lost his temper, he spent 4 hours explaining it to me. He made it sound like a mathematical equation. My behavior plus his stress equals the outburst. He was so logical, Dad. He used his detective voice. He told me he was correcting the course of our family, and I learned to believe the explanations. I learned to believe that if I just moved a little more quietly, or cooked a little better, the equation would balance out. I listened to the hollow resonance of her voice against the porcelain. She describes the gradual tightening of the perimeter, the way she stopped calling me, because Edric was always nearby, always interested in the conversation, always holding the secondary line. She speaks about the way he filtered her world until the only truth she had was the one he provided. As she speaks, my mind flashes to a specific page in my digital ledger. Entry, 38, October 14th. Subject N. Long sleeves and 80-degree weather. Noticed a yellowish-purple contusion on the inner forearm when she reached for a napkin. Faded grip pattern. I wrote it down. I said nothing. I had carried that entry for months. I had seen the mark of the badge on my own daughter's skin, and I had stayed silent, waiting for the moment the patient was ready for the intervention. Sitting on this cold floor at 2:30 in the morning, the weight of that silence feels heavier than any medical failure I've ever endured. I had documented her descent with the detachment of a scientist, and now I was sitting in the debris of that choice. I didn't protect him, Dad. Nadine says, her voice finally breaking on the last word. A single tear tracks through the makeup she had applied so carefully to look happy for the ER staff. I stood in that doorway and I watched him take Caradoc into the hall. I heard the sound, and I did nothing. I was so afraid of the equation. I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't get worse. No, I say, turning my head to look at her. You didn't protect him then, but you are going to help me protect him now. That is what matters tonight, Nadine. Not the 16 months that came before. Not the explanations or the silence. What we do from this second forward is the only reality that exists. I reach out and place my hand over her folded ones. They are ice cold. I have the recordings, I tell her. I have the ledger, and I have the law coming through the front doors. But the law needs a mother who is willing to stand up and say the equation is a lie. I need you to be the witness he didn't expect you to be. Nadine looks at me. For a long time, the only sound is the hum of the restroom fan. Then she nods. It's a slow motion, hesitant at first, but then it becomes certain. It is the nod of someone making a real decision for the first time in a very long time. The mask of compliance doesn't just slip, it shatters. "What do I need to do?" she asks. "You need to stand up," I say. I get to my feet first, my joints aching from the cold tile. I reach down and take her hands, pulling her up from the floor. She wobbles for a second, then finds her balance. She smooths her skirt, wipes the tear from her cheek, and takes a deep, shuddering breath. The woman who walked into this restroom was a victim of a detective's narrative. The woman walking out is the daughter of a neurosurgeon who knows how to excise a cancer. We walk out of the restroom together. The south corridor is still dark, but as we approach the main intersection of the ER, the light changes. Standing at the end of the long white corridor is Constance Bellamy. She looks exactly as I expected, her heavy wool coat draped over one arm, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose, her eyes fixed on the screen of her phone. She is already reading the emergency filings, her thumb scrolling through the digital evidence I sent from the stairwell. She looks up as we approach. She doesn't offer a greeting. She doesn't offer a platitude. She just taps her phone screen and looks at Nadine. "The judge signed the emergency protective order 5 minutes ago." Constance says, her voice a sharp welcome blade in the silence. "Edric Brandwell is officially barred from approaching either of you, and the internal affairs team just cleared the security desk at the main entrance." Nadine grips my arm. I feel the strength returning to her fingers. The operation is no longer in the diagnostic phase. The excision has begun. Constance Bellamy does not say hello. She does not offer a platitude about the hour or the humidity of the Nashville night. She simply looks at me over the rim of her reading glasses, her thumb frozen on the screen of her tablet. 44 entries. She says, her voice a sharp percussive instrument in the quiet corridor. Consistent timestamps, no gaps in the chronology. In 30 years of family law, I have seen perhaps 3 clients who documented with this level of clinical detachment. Most people lead with their hearts, Raymond. You led with a spreadsheet. I led with what would hold up in a deposition, I reply. Marlene Ashby has unlocked a small conference room for us, a windowless box tucked behind the administrative wing. It is a room designed for quiet crises consultations with families who have just received a terminal diagnosis. There is a rectangular oak table, 4 mismatched chairs, and a whiteboard in the corner with a medication dosage calculation that no one bothered to erase. The air smells of stale coffee and the ozone of a laser printer. Constance sits at the head of the table, spreading her documents out like a general preparing a map for an invasion. She reads through the 44 entries on my phone, her eyes moving with a predatory speed. Every few seconds she offers a small, sharp nod, the silent punctuation of a lawyer, finding something of immense legal value. She isn't looking for the pain. She is looking for the patterns. Entry 22, she murmurs, tapping the screen. The rib bruising, you noted the diameter of the impact zone. That's excellent. It correlates perfectly with the tread of a standard-issue patrol boot. And the March lunch. The way you describe his psychological state as hyper-vigilant. That goes directly to the emotional abuse statutes. My phone vibrates on the table. It's Dr. Gavin Marsh. I put it on speaker. Raymond, Gavin's voice, is tight professional. Dr. Edmund Priestley from Vanderbilt's own child protective team has finished his review of the imaging. He's the senior forensic pediatrician on call. His conclusion is definitive. The fracture pattern in the left radius is the result of forced hyperextension. It is a rotational injury caused by a manual wrenching of the limb. It is biologically impossible for this to have been caused by a fall down hardwood stairs. I feel Nadine stiffen in the chair beside me, but I keep my gaze on the whiteboard. "There's more," Gavin continues, and I can hear the grim hesitation in his breath. Priestley found evidence of a healed fracture in the same arm midshaft ulna. Based on the bone remodeling, he estimates it happened approximately 6 to 9 months ago. It was never set. It never received medical treatment. The boy just let it knit on its own, in the dark. I stand up slowly. The information hits me with the weight of a physical object. 6 months ago. Caradoc had been walking around my garden, eating steak at my table, carrying a broken bone in his arm and a secret in his chest, and I had missed it. I had seen the bruises, the long sleeves, the withdrawal, but I had missed the structural failure of the bone itself. I take a breath and file the feeling away. I compress the guilt into a small, hard sphere and bury it deep. There is no room for a grandfather's remorse in this conference room. Not here, not now. Right now, I am the lead investigator of a crime scene. Thank you, Gavin, I say. Ensure Priestley signs the forensic affidavit. I want that report in the hands of the chief of medicine by 3 a.m. I hang up just as the door opens. Denise Gadsden, the social worker, enters the room. She looks at Nadine, then at Constance before turning to me. She looks like she hasn't slept in 48 hours, but her eyes are bright with a fierce protective energy. The intake interview is complete. Denise reports sitting in the remaining chair. Caradoc is a remarkable witness. He described a pattern of escalating abuse over the last 14 months. He identified 7 specific incidents that left visible marks. His account has a non-rehearsed quality that is very compelling for a judge. He even self-corrected twice on the dates, a detail that actually adds to his credibility. It shows honest recollection rather than a memorized script. He told me about the watch Raymond. He told me everything. Constance sets down my phone. The light from the screen reflects in her glasses, making her look like a digital oracle. Raymond, she says, her voice dropping into a lower, more serious register. The recordings change the nature of this case entirely. We aren't just talking about a custody dispute or a temporary restraining order anymore. The audio of the drive to the hospital, the part where he explicitly instructs the boy on how to lie to the medical staff that constitutes witness tampering and kidnapping under the color of law. Inspector Dunmore is going to have more than enough for an arrest warrant by morning. MNPD. Internal Affairs won't be able to protect him even if they wanted to. Constance turns her attention to my daughter. Nadine is sitting quietly in the corner, both hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee Marlene left there. She looks smaller than she did an hour ago, but the shaking has stopped. Her eyes are fixed on Constance, reflecting a dawning realization of the magnitude of the storm we have summoned. What do you need from me right now? I ask Constance. I have the physical evidence and the boy's statement, Constance says, but I need the missing piece of the equation. I need a voluntary statement from the primary witness to the domestic environment. I need Nadine to go on the record about what has happened to her over the last 16 months. I need the history of the house from someone who didn't have the luxury of leaving it. I look at Nadine. I am prepared to defend her choice if she says she can't do it. I am prepared to tell Constance that the patient isn't ready for this level of stress. But Nadine doesn't wait for my intervention. She sets the coffee cup down on the oak table with a firm, decisive click. She looks back at me, and for the first time since she married that man, I see the daughter I raised, the one who doesn't flinch when the stakes are high. I'll do it, she says. She doesn't wait for me to ask. She doesn't look toward the door to see if Edric is watching. She simply leans forward into the light of the conference room, her hands steady on the table. I'll tell you everything. She repeats, her voice gaining a resonance I haven't heard in years. From the wedding day to tonight, I'll give you the names, the dates, and the lies. Just tell me where to sign. Constance pulls a fresh legal pad from her bag and clicks her pen. The atmosphere in the room shifts. The diagnostic phase is over. The case file is open, and for the first time in 9 months, the truth is being recorded by the people who have the power to enforce it. 44 entries enough to destroy a cruel life. If you're still here, comment evidence below. Just a note, some details are fictionalized to deepen the story and its message. Any similarities are purely coincidental, but the meaning of protection remains. If you don't want to hear the rest of this verdict, you can leave now. Virgil Dunmore arrives at Vanderbilt at 3 in the morning, not in uniform, and certainly not alone. I know this because Marlene calls me from the nurse's station. Her voice has lost its professional neutrality. It carries the sharp electric edge of someone who knows the cavalry has finally breached the perimeter. Dr. Hargrove, Marlene says, her breathing audible. 2 men just came through the main entrance. They didn't stop at the desk. They didn't ask for a visitor's pass. They're headed your way, and Raymond, they have the look of internal lightning. Thank you, Marlene. Hold the elevators if you have to. I want this hallway empty. I step out of the conference room. The air in the south wing feels ionized heavy with the ozone of an impending strike. Virgil Dunmore rounds the corner, a tall, granite-faced man in a charcoal overcoat that seems to swallow the hospital's sterile light. Beside him is a younger officer, Noel, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Virgil doesn't offer a handshake. He is a man who spent 20 years in internal affairs. He doesn't shake hands with the world, he dissects it. I've listened to the recordings, Raymond, Virgil says. His voice is a low tectonic rumble that vibrates in the floorboards. All 3. The encryption was professional, but the content is damning. I've seen a lot of monsters hide behind the gold shield, but rarely one this articulate about his own cruelty. What's the status, Virgil? I ask, my voice a flat, clinical counterpoint to his gravity. The status is a total eclipse, Virgil replies. He gestures to the briefcase. Under the Lautenberg Amendment, a law enforcement officer cannot legally possess a firearm if there is probable cause for domestic violence. We don't need a conviction yet. We only need the threshold of evidence you've provided. Between the audio files and the CPT forensic report on the boy's arm, Edric Branwell is no longer a detective in the eyes of the state. He is a liability. We are here to strip the hardware. Before we move, my phone vibrates. It is Noel Kavanaugh, the high school principal. I put him on speaker. The high-stakes nature of the night has turned everyone into a night shift worker. Raymond, I'm at the school, Noel says, his voice strained. I've bypassed the encryption on the counselor's private server. Ingrid Faulkner, the woman who handled Caradoc's art scholarship, kept a separate hidden file. She documented a meeting in November where Caradoc nearly broke. He was about to speak, then he looked out the window, saw Edric's patrol car idling at the curb, and physically recoiled. She wrote, and I quote, "The subject displayed a level of terror consistent with a hostage, not a student." She didn't report it because he never gave her a specific act to cite, but the pattern is there. It's all there. I'm emailing the scans now. Virgil listens, his jaw tightening. Hostage. He repeats the word, tasting like lead. That confirms the kidnapping under color of law. That's enough to bypass the precinct's union reps for tonight. Let's go. Virgil and his partner move toward the public waiting area. I do not follow them into the room. I have spent my life in operating theaters. I know that the most critical part of an excision is maintaining a sterile field. I am the observer, the architect of this moment, but the execution belongs to the state. I stand at the very edge of the corridor doorway, shadowed by the architectural alcove, watching through the thick soundproof glass panes of the lounge. Through the glass, the scene is a silent film of absolute destruction. Edric is sitting in a corner chair, his long legs stretched out, the gold badge on his belt, glinting like a false god under the flickering fluorescent tubes. He looks bored. He looks like a man who thinks he is merely waiting for a technicality to clear so he can go back to his kingdom. Then Virgil Dunmore enters the frame. I watch Edric's posture shift. It's a subtle, instinctive tightening of the shoulders, the way a wolf reacts when it catches the scent of a larger predator. He doesn't stand as a father. He stands as a subordinate caught in a lie. Virgil doesn't waste time with a seat. He stands directly in Edric's space, his overcoat making him look like a shadow cast by the hand of justice itself. I see Virgil's lips move. I cannot hear the words, but I see the impact. Edric's face, usually a masterpiece of practiced detective-grade confidence, begins to fracture. It's the specific rapid-fire blinking of a man whose brain is trying to find a loophole that no longer exists. He looks around the room, his eyes darting toward the exits, toward the patrol officers at the desk, looking for a relationship to save him. But the patrol officers are looking at the floor. Word travels fast in a hospital. They've already seen the IA credentials. Edric's gaze snaps toward the glass. He finds me. I am standing perfectly still in the doorway, my hands at my sides, my face a mask of unyielding surgical coldness. I do not offer him the satisfaction of anger. Anger is for the weak. I offer him only the result of 44 entries. I offer him the silence of March. I offer him the reality of a grandfather who outthought him at every turn. Our eyes lock through the glass. In that moment, the hierarchy is reset. The man with the badge realizes he is looking at the man who owns the building, the history, and the truth. Edric's face twists a flicker of pure, cornered malice, but it is followed immediately by a hollow, terrifying emptiness, the realization that he is finished. Virgil's partner steps forward and holds out an open, heavy-duty evidence bag. Edric's hand goes to his belt. It is a slow, agonizing movement. He unclips the holster of his service weapon, the black, heavy instrument of his intimidation. He handles it like a piece of dead weight, dropping it into the bag. Then comes the badge. He unpins the gold shield, the very thing he used to silence Nadine and terrify Caradoc. He looks at it for a fleeting second, perhaps remembering the day he earned it, or perhaps just mourning the loss of his shield before dropping it on top of the gun. The clatter of metal on metal is silent to me, but I feel it in my marrow. The eclipse is total. Marlene Ashby appears at my shoulder. She is breathing hard, her eyes fixed on the evidence bag through the glass. "He's gone, Raymond," she whispers. "He's just a man in a cheap suit now, no gun, no shield, no power. He was always just a man in a suit, Marlene." I say, my voice a low, vibrating chord. The badge was just a symptom we had to treat. The mother, she asks, her voice softening. Nadine, she's in the conference room. She's signing the voluntary statement. She's no longer his alibi. Marlene nods, a fierce protective light in her eyes. Good. About time someone cleared the cancer out of this department. I watch as Virgil's partner places a hand firmly on Edric's elbow. It is the escort of a fallen officer. They lead him toward the main exit, away from Bay 6, away from the family he tried to dismantle. Edric walks with a strange, shuffling gait now, his arrogance drained out of him like fluid from a wound. He is flanked by the IA team moving through the lobby, like a ghost being exorcised from a cathedral. I stay at the glass until the double doors slide open, and the humid Nashville night swallows them whole. I watch the blue and red lights of the IA vehicle flicker against the hospital's brickwork before fading into the distance. The predator is gone. The hallway is quiet again. I turn my back on the empty waiting room. I don't need to see his booking photo or hear his final excuses. In neurosurgery, once the tumor is in the jar and the monitors are stable, you don't focus on the discarded tissue. You focus on the patient's breath. You focus on the slow, painful, beautiful process of waking up. I begin to walk back toward Bay 6. My boots click on the linoleum, a rhythmic, steady sound. The operation was successful. The field is clear. Now it is time to tell my grandson that he can finally stop recording. The hours between 4 in the morning and 9 in the morning are what we called in surgery closing time. It is a specific liminal space. The crisis has passed. The major decisions have been made, and the adrenaline that sustained the team through the hemorrhage is beginning to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep rhythmic exhaustion. In this phase, all that remains is executing each step precisely until the procedure is finished, suturing the fascia, counting the sponges, verifying the vitals one last time. It is not the most dramatic part of the operation, but it is the most critical for long-term survival. If you rush the closing, you invite the infection. I return to Bay 6 at 4:15 a.m. The hospital has settled into that strange underwater quiet that precedes the shift change. The frantic energy of the midnight trauma has dissipated, leaving only the steady hypnotic hum of the heart monitors. Caradoc is awake. He is propped up against the pillows, his splinted arm resting on a foam wedge. He looks smaller than he did 4 hours ago, the shadows under his eyes looking like thumbprints of charcoal against his pale skin. For the first time since I walked through those double doors at midnight, we are simply sitting together without a crisis to manage a recording, to trigger, or a detective to outmaneuver. I pull the plastic molded chair close to the gurney and sit down. I don't check his chart. I don't look at the monitor. I just sit. Is he still here, Grandpa? Caradoc whispers. His voice is barely audible over the whir of the ventilation. No, I answer simply. I keep my tone even a steady anchor for him to latch on to. He is under investigation by internal affairs. He was escorted from the building nearly an hour ago. He no longer has his badge, and he no longer has his weapon. He is no longer a factor in this room, Caradoc. Not tonight. Not ever again. Caradoc takes a long, shuddering breath, the kind of breath that suggests he is finally allowing his lungs to expand to their full capacity. And Mom, did he find her? She's safe, I say, leaning forward so he can see the absolute certainty in my eyes. She's in a secure area with Constance. She gave a full voluntary statement tonight, Caradoc. She told the truth about everything. That was incredibly brave of her. She's doing exactly what she needs to do to make sure the two of you are protected. We sit in silence for a long time. It is a comfortable, heavy silence. Neither of us feels the need to fill it with explanations or apologies. We have survived the primary trauma. Now we are simply waiting for the anesthesia of the night to wear off. My mind drifts back through the sequence of the last 9 hours, the frantic calls from the stairwell, the cold clinical precision of the conference room, the freezing tile floor where I sat with my daughter, and the red pulsing dot on the smartwatch that started it all. I think about Constance Bellamy. I know her. Right now she is likely in a quiet corner of the administrative wing, her phone glued to her ear, her legal mind working through the emergency after-hours court line with the persistence of a hydraulic press. The sun begins to rise over Nashville, casting a pale honey-colored light across the linoleum floor of the ER. The night shift nurses are starting their final rounds, their movements slow and practiced. At 8:47 a.m., my phone vibrates in my pocket. I stand up and step outside the curtain to take the call. I need the hallway's neutral space for this, Raymond, Constance says. Her voice is raspy from hours of talking, but it carries the unmistakable resonance of victory. I filed the petition through the emergency after hours line at 2:45 this morning. I've been on the phone with the clerk of the juvenile court for the last 3 hours. I hold my breath. I am a man who has waited for pathology results 1,000 times, but this feels different. This isn't about a cell count. It's about a life. The on-call juvenile court judge reviewed the entire digital file at 8:15. Constance continues. There is a single beat of silence, a dramatic pause that she's earned. The judge signed the order, Raymond. Emergency temporary custody is granted to you, effective immediately. It is an ex parte order, pending a full evidentiary hearing within 15 days. Edric Brandwell is prohibited from any contact with the minor, and his access to the residence is suspended by court mandate. You are Caradoc's legal guardian as of 8:32 this morning. I stand in the middle of the hallway, the phone still pressed to my ear, those words settling into my chest like lead. 8:32. A specific timestamp on a legal document that has effectively severed the chain of custody from a predator and handed it to a protector. Raymond, are you there? I'm here, Constance. I say, my voice thick. Thank you. I don't think you realize what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, she replies. I've given that boy a chance to breathe. Now get him out of that hospital and take him home. I'll handle the paperwork for the hearing. Go. I hang up and stand still for 40 seconds, looking at the clock on the wall. 9:19 a.m. The world outside is starting its day. People are driving to work, buying coffee, checking their social media, entirely unaware that a war was fought and won in the dark of Base 6. I pull the curtain back and step into the room. Caradoc looks up at me. He sees it in my face before I even speak. The hypervigilance he's developed over the last year is finally serving a positive purpose. He can read the relief in the set of my shoulders. A judge signed an emergency custody order at 8:32 this morning, Caradoc. I say, I make sure each word is distinct, each syllable a fact he can rely on. You are coming home with me. We are waiting for the discharge papers now, but the decision has been made. That is not a plan we are hoping for. That is a legal binding fact as of 47 minutes ago. Caradoc is quiet for a long moment. He stares at his splinted arm, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He doesn't cheer. He doesn't cry. He simply absorbs the reality of his own freedom. Then he looks at me, his eyes wide and vulnerable. Is Mom okay? Is she really coming to? And that is the moment. The surgical mask I've been wearing since midnight, the one made of clinical detachment, strategic calculation, and 44 entries of documented abuse, finally begins to dissolve. I feel the cold tile of the restroom floor under my palms again. I hear the sound of the badge hitting the evidence bag. I feel the weight of the 9 months I spent watching and waiting, wondering if I was doing enough. I sit back down on the edge of the gurney and take his hand, the good one. For the first time, I allow myself to feel the crushing paternal terror I've been holding at bay to keep the operation sterile. Yes, I say, my voice finally cracking. She's okay, and she's coming with us. We're all going home. I look at the clock again. The surgery is over. The patient is stable. The closing is complete. For the first time in 16 months, the house is ours again. We leave Vanderbilt at 10:15 in the morning. The hospital has transformed into a different creature than the one I entered 10 hours ago. The nocturnal hush, that strange underwater silence of the early hours, has been replaced by the high-frequency energy of a premier trauma center in full gear. The paging system is a constant rhythmic pulse, and the hallways are filled with resident specialists and families caught in their own private intersections of hope and grief. In surgery, you don't just step away from the table once the sutures are in. You verify the count, you thank the team, and you ensure the transition of care is absolute. I lead Caradoc toward the main elevators, his small bag of belongings slung over my shoulder. But before we reach the sliding glass doors of the lobby, there are debts of professional respect that must be paid. I stop first at the central nurse's station. Marlene Ashby is still there, finishing her handover to the day shift charge nurse. Her movements remain precise despite the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes, a map of a night spent in the trenches. I wait until she is finished standing at the edge of the mahogany desk. When she looks up and sees me, she doesn't offer a polite customer service smile. She offers a nod of mutual recognition. I don't thank her in generalities. In my world, a general thank you is a polite dismissal. Marlene, I say, my voice steady and low. I need you to know that the timestamps you kept on the detective's interactions at the triage desk were the first line of defense. Your refusal to let him bypass protocol gave me the window I needed. And the conference room at 2:30, the coffee you left for Nadine, those weren't just gestures. They were clinical interventions. You didn't just manage a floor tonight. You managed a family. I won't forget that. Marlene looks at me for a long beat, her gaze flickering to Caradoc, who is leaning tiredly against a pillar. She reaches out and taps the desk with a blunt finger. He's a bully with a badge, doctor. We've seen his type in here before, but we've never seen anyone bring the hammer down the way you did. Take care of that boy. He's got eyes that have seen too much for 16. I will. Thank you, Marlene. As we move toward the south corridor, the sunlight begins to flood the glass walkways, making the sterile environment feel almost warm. I spot Dr. Gavin Marsh near the staff elevators, staring at a digital tablet with the blank expression of a man who has lived 3 lifetimes since midnight. When he sees us, he lowers the device and leans against the wall, a posture of temporary defeat and ultimate relief. The discharge is fully processed, Raymond. Gavin says, his voice raspy. The social worker and the chief of medicine have both signed off on the transfer to your care. The legal department is already archiving the forensic images. Your report made it possible, Gavin. I say stepping closer so the passing orderlies can't overhear. I know the pressure you were under when a detective was breathing down your neck. Doctor, Priestley's assessment was the final word, but your initial diagnostic work on the rotational nature of the fracture made it irrefutable. You didn't blink when the shield was flashed at you. That's the definition of a physician. Gavin looks at his shoes, a shadow of regret crossing his face. I should have called internal affairs myself the second I saw the imaging. I let his rank intimidate the process for 45 minutes. I'll be thinking about those 45 minutes for a long time. You kept him safe until the cavalry arrived. I reply, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. In this building at that hour, that is the only metric that matters. You held the line when it was thin. Most wouldn't. We continue our walk, the squeak of Caradoc's sneakers on the linoleum, a rhythmic reminder of our progress. Near the quiet alcove at the far end of the waiting area, I see Nadine. She is sitting alone away from the flow of the morning traffic. She has cleaned her face and pulled her hair back into a tight, severe ponytail, but she still looks like she is vibrating on a frequency of pure raw nerves. I tell Caradoc to wait by the vending machines for a moment. I approach her, but I don't sit beside her this time. I pull a chair from a nearby table and sit directly across from her. This conversation requires her to see my face to read the absolute absence of judgment and the cold presence of a new reality. The order is signed Nadine, I say. It is a temporary emergency order, but it is absolute. Caradoc is coming home with me now. The judge has barred Edric from the house and from any contact with either of you. The locks on the Green Hills apartment were changed 2 hours ago. My security contact is already on site there. Nadine nods her hands, still trembling in her lap. And what about me, Dad? Where do I fit in this new version of the world? You have choices now, I say, leaning forward. Real choices, not the ones he dictated to you through a filter of fear. You can come to my house, or you can go to the apartment, but you need to decide when you're ready to talk. Not because the lawyers are waiting, and not because I'm pushing for the next entry in a ledger. Because you are finally ready to own your own story again. I reach into my pocket and pull out a small white business card. It's my personal cell number, the private line that avoids the hospital switchboard and the office staff. It is the exact same number I wrote on a scrap of paper and handed to Caradoc 9 months ago, during a lunch he thought I didn't understand. I place it on the table between us. When you're ready and not a second before this is how you reach me, I say. This line is always open. No one else hears it. Just like it was for your son. Nadine looks at the card, her fingers brushing the embossed paper, as if it were a physical anchor. She looks up at me, and for the first time I see a glimmer of the woman she was before she married the badge. I should have called you sooner, Dad. I should have known you were watching. You called me now, I say, standing up and offering no room for further guilt. In my profession, the only timestamp that counts is the one that marks the beginning of the recovery. The past is just data. Let's go. I lead them out through the parking structure. The air is heavy and humid, smelling of exhaust and summer asphalt, but it feels like the cleanest air I've breathed in a year. I find my car, the same one I parked in a blur of adrenaline 10 hours ago. I settle Caradoc into the passenger seat and Nadine into the back. I get into the driver's seat, but I don't start the engine immediately. For the first time since midnight, I allow myself to sit perfectly still. It isn't a tactical pause. It isn't a mental simulation of the next 3 moves. I sit still because the operation is over, the field is clear, and the patient is stable. I look at the massive brick and glass facade of Vanderbilt one last time. It is a cathedral of crisis, and tonight it served its purpose. I think about the card I gave Nadine, the same number I gave her son. It is a full closed circle. 9 months of silence, 44 entries of evidence, and 3 audio files have all converged into this quiet moment in a parking garage. I reach for the ignition. The hum of the engine is a steady, reassuring vibration. The ledger is closed. The predator is gone. And for the first time in 16 months, I am not just a surgeon documenting a decline. I am a grandfather, and I am taking my family home. The transition from the sterile fluorescent intensity of Vanderbilt to the quiet wood-paneled corridors of my home in Forest Hills felt like a decompression chamber. We arrived at 10:45 in the morning, the Nashville sun already baking the long private driveway. I had called Rosemary Vance from the car while we were still on I-65. I didn't offer a clinical summary. I simply told her I was bringing 2 people home and they would need the West Wing guest rooms. Rosemary has been the steady heartbeat of this house for 15 years. She understands the subtext of my silences better than most surgeons understand a scan. She didn't ask why my daughter looked like a ghost, or why my grandson was wearing a hospital-issue splint. She simply had the rooms prepared fresh linens, windows cracked to let in the scent of magnolias, and a pot of warm chicken soup waiting on the kitchen table. Caradoc sat at the table in a daze. He ate 1 bowl of soup, his movements mechanical, then walked to his assigned room. He didn't ask for a television remote. He simply lay down and slept for 17 hours straight. It wasn't the restless sleep of someone who has given up. It was the profound evolutionary sleep of a body that had finally received absolute legal permission to stop being a sentry. For 16 months, that boy had been a human recording device and a shield. Now behind the heavy oak doors of a house that a certain individual could no longer enter, his nervous system finally surrendered. He wasn't tracking footsteps in a hallway anymore. He was just a boy in a bed. Nadine didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen for most of that first afternoon, staring out the large bay window toward the backyard. The Forest Hills lot is deep filled with old-growth oaks and dense privacy hedges, the opposite of the fishbowl existence she had been living in. I made a pot of coffee, placed a cup on the granite counter beside her, and asked nothing. I didn't ask about the statement she gave Constance. I simply let the steam from the coffee be the only conversation between us. Rosemary Vance moved through the house with a quiet, ghost-like efficiency. She replaced towels, dimmed lights, and kept the peripheral noise to a minimum. She understands that this is a house in post-operative recovery. You don't ask a patient to run a marathon the hour after they leave the PACU. You monitor the vitals and wait for stability to take hold. She watched Nadine from the corner of her eye, providing the comfort of presence without the weight of scrutiny. On day 2, the house began to shift. The heavy air of the first 24 hours started to circulate. Caradoc came downstairs at 10 in the morning, his hair a chaotic mess, wearing an old t-shirt of mine that was 3 sizes too large. He looked hollowed out, but present. He sat at the breakfast bar and ate 2 bowls of oatmeal, as if he were rediscovering the concept of hunger. After the second bowl, he turned his head and looked out the kitchen window toward the detached garage. "Is the Bronco still in there, Grandpa?" He asked, his voice scratchy but clear. "It's still in there," I replied, leaning against the counter. "Under the canvas cover, exactly where we left it last summer." He watched the garage for a long moment, the gears in his head turning. "Waiting for what?" "For the right person to have the time to work on it," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Rebuilding a 1974 engine isn't something you rush. It requires a specific kind of focus. It requires someone who knows how to listen to the machine." Caradoc looked at the garage a moment longer. He didn't ask for the keys yet, but the way he looked at the building changed. The hypervigilance that usually searched the horizon for a patrol car was replaced for a fleeting second by the technical curiosity of a mechanic. He wasn't looking for a threat, he was looking at a project. "Maybe later this week," he murmured before turning back to his oatmeal. That evening the house grew still as shadows lengthened over the lawn. I was in the library when I heard Nadine's voice from the living room. It was low-hushed, but rhythmic. She was on the phone. I didn't move. I knew she wasn't calling the man from the hospital. His number was blocked by a court-mandated filter, and the internal investigators were likely monitoring his every move anyway. This was something else. It was a long conversation, about 20 minutes of quiet, punctuated murmurs. In the ledger of the last year, I would have noted the duration and the physical reaction. I would have analyzed the call for signs of weakness. But sitting in my library, I realized that my role as a documentarian had ended the moment the judge signed that order. Her phone calls were no longer evidence. They were part of her own journey, a path she had to walk without a surgeon directing her footsteps. When she finally hung up and walked into the kitchen for water, she passed through the light of the hallway. I saw her face clearly. Her eyes were red, puffy, and tired, but it was a different kind of redness than the one I had seen on the cold tile floor at Vanderbilt. Those weren't the eyes of someone staring at a predator. They were the eyes of someone who had just looked into a mirror and recognized the person staring back. It was the look of something beginning to open, a slow, painful thawing of a heart that had been frozen in a defensive crouch for 16 months. It wasn't pain, it was the exhaustion of someone who had finally stopped fighting herself. "You okay, Nadine?" I asked softly from the shadows. She paused the glass of water halfway to her lips. She looked at me, and for a second the mask of the victim vanished completely. "I'm starting to remember things, Dad," she said. "Not just the bad things. I'm remembering who I was before I started apologizing for existing." "That's a good person to remember," I said. She nodded, once took a long drink of water, and walked back toward her room. Her gait was still hesitant, but she wasn't hugging her own ribs anymore. She wasn't protecting a bruise. I stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The first 2 days were over. The internal bleeding had stopped. The structural repairs were beginning. I looked out toward the garage, thinking about the old Ford Bronco and the boy sleeping upstairs. The operation was a success, but the recovery was only on its second page. I turned off the kitchen light. For the first time in 9 months, I didn't check an app before I went to bed. I didn't need to. The only recording that mattered now was the sound of my family breathing in the rooms next to mine. Rosalind Kemper arrives exactly on time. I have always respected punctuality. It is the silent agreement that your time is as valuable as mine. In the operating theater, a 3-minute delay is a failure of discipline. In a house recovering from a year of tactical silence, it is the first brick of a new foundation. Rosalind is a clinical psychologist specializing in adolescent trauma, but she carries none of the academic pretension often found in her field. She dressed in a soft navy blazer and carried a leather satchel that looked like it had seen a decade of honest work. When I opened the door, she offered a professional nod, her eyes briefly scanning the foyer of my Forest Hills home, noting the stillness of the air. "Dr. Hargrove," she said. "Rosalind, he's in the living room." I introduced them with the brevity of a surgical handoff. Caradoc was sitting on the edge of the sofa, his splinted arm resting in his lap, his eyes fixed on the empty fireplace. He looked up when we entered his shoulders, tensing by habit, a shadow of the old hyper-vigilance flickering across his face. "Caradoc, this is Rosalind Kemper," I said. "She's here to talk. I'll be upstairs in my office if either of you need anything." I left immediately. I didn't linger in the hallway. I didn't suggest tea or offer to start the conversation. I walked straight up the stairs to my office and closed the door with a firm, audible click. It was a calculated move. For 16 months, Caradoc had lived in a world where every word was a potential trigger for a detective's wrath. He needed to understand with absolute clarity that this space was his. He needed to feel the physical weight of my absence to believe in the privacy of his own voice. I spent the next hour working on administrative files for the hospital, forcing my mind to stay on the page. I did not listen for sounds from downstairs. I didn't try to catch the cadence of their voices through the floorboards. That was the point of the intervention, to cede control. In neurosurgery, there is a moment where you must trust the monitors and the primary assistant. This was that moment. If I wanted him to stop being a recording device, I had to stop being the observer. When the hour mark hit, I heard the heavy front door open and close. I walked downstairs to find Rosalind standing on the porch. Caradoc was no longer in the living room. He had retreated back to the West Wing, likely exhausted by the emotional labor of the session. I walked her to her car, the Nashville humidity pressing against us. "He's articulate," Rosalind said, her voice dropping into a professional register. "Remarkably self-aware for his age, Raymond. But there's an exhaustion there that goes beyond lack of sleep. He's been a soldier in a war he didn't start. He told me about the watch. He's been doing the work alone for a long time. He's always been too responsible," I said, looking toward the oaks. "He just needed permission to stop," she replied. She paused, looking back at the house. "The environment you've created is registering. He knows he's safe here. That isn't an automatic response for a child who has lived under a threat. He's starting to let the guard down. It's a good sign, but it's a long road." Nadine began her own parallel recovery that week. Denise Gadsden had referred her to a domestic violence advocate, a specialist whose office sat in a quiet brick building 3 miles away. It wasn't a clinical setting, it was a place for restructuring a shattered identity. I drove her to the first session. The car ride was silent, the hum of the engine, the only thing filling the space between us. I didn't ask her what she planned to say. I didn't offer advice on how to frame the last 16 months. When we arrived, I pulled up to the curb and waited. On the way back, I asked nothing. I didn't look for tears or signs of breakthrough. I simply drove her home, providing the one thing she hadn't had in years, a witness who required nothing in return. That evening, the house was dark except for the amber glow of the library lamps. I was standing in the upstairs hallway about to enter my office when a sound stopped me in my tracks. It came from the end of the hall from Caradoc's room. It was laughter, but it wasn't the measured, careful laughter he used when he was trying to put people at ease. It wasn't the laughter of someone calculating whether it was safe to be happy. It was a sudden, sharp burst of genuine amusement, the kind of laughter that happens in the split second before the brain decides to intervene. I could hear the tinny sound of a video playing on a tablet, followed by another genuine chuckle. It was the sound of a 16-year-old boy being a 16-year-old boy. I stood frozen in the dark hallway and listened. I didn't go in. I didn't say his name or knock on the door to share the moment. I stayed in the shadows, an invisible guardian of a sound that had been absent for far too long. I let it fill the house, echoing off the high ceilings and the hardwood floors. It was the most important data point I had gathered in a year. It was better than any recording on a smartwatch. It was better than a judge's signature or a forensic report. I stayed there for a long minute, letting the lightness of it settle into the walls. This was what the house was always supposed to sound like. The operation wasn't just about the excision of a predator, it was about the restoration of this specific frequency. I finally stepped into my office and closed the door, leaving the hallway to the boy and his laughter. The recovery was no longer just a plan. It was a reality vibrating in the air. Constance calls at 7:15 in the morning, before I have finished my first cup of coffee, which she knows and has never once waited for, because Constance Bellamy does not believe good news should wait for coffee. She believes in the momentum of a winning case. And in the legal world, momentum is a fragile thing that must be harnessed the moment it appears. Raymond, she says, and I can hear the sharp tapping of her pen against her desk, a rhythmic sound of victory. The district attorney's office just finalized the initial filing. It's a clean sweep. I lean against the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise from my mug. Give it to me straight, Constance. No fluff. Edric Brandwell has been formally charged with 3 felony counts. First, aggravated assault under Tennessee. Code Section 39-13-102, a Class C felony for the intentional and reckless causing of serious bodily injury. Second, aggravated child abuse under Section 39-15-402, a Class A felony given the age of the victim and the nature of the injury. And finally, official misconduct under Section 39-16-402, a Class E felony for using his position as a detective to intimidate and bypass mandatory reporting protocols. His badge has been permanently revoked pending a conviction. He is no longer a law enforcement officer, Raymond. He is a defendant. I take a slow sip of the coffee. The heat is grounding. And the evidence? The DA told me the recordings were the clearest evidence they had ever seen in a case of this type. Constance says, her voice softening slightly. They specifically cited the internal timestamps from the device and the sheer consistency of the threats. Your grandson's discipline in those moments, it's what's making this an open and shut case. His voice, the specific dates, the repetition of the pattern, there was nothing for the defense to argue against. They can't claim it was a one-time lapse in judgment when you have 44 entries of systematic erosion. What about Nadine? I ask. This is the question that has been hanging over the west wing of the house like a heavy fog. The DA has officially determined that she was a victim of coercive control, not a co-conspirator. They are not filing charges against her. She has agreed to cooperate fully with the prosecution as a material witness. She's no longer looking at a prison cell, Raymond. She's looking at a witness stand. I thank Constance and hang up. I find Nadine sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. She looks up at me as I sit across from her. I don't sugarcoat the news. I give it to her with the same directness I use when explaining a surgical prognosis. I lay out the charges, I explain the felony codes, I tell her that her role has shifted from a person under investigation to a person seeking justice. I tell her that she is safe from the law, as long as she continues to tell the truth. Nadine listens, her face pale, but her eyes remarkably clear. She absorbs the reality of Edric's downfall without the flinching I expected. When I finish, she stays quiet for a long moment, watching a bird on the feeder outside the window. "Can I see Caradoc?" she asks finally. Her voice is small, devoid of the entitlement she used to carry. It's a question of permission, not a demand of right. "I'll ask him," I reply. It's his answer to give Nadine, not mine. He is the one who lived in the silence of Bay 6. He gets to decide when the door opens. Nadine nods slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "That's the right answer, Dad. I know that's the right answer. I've spent too long deciding things for him based on what I was afraid of. It's time he gets to decide for himself." I leave her in the kitchen and walk out toward the detached garage. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of cut grass and turning earth. I find Caradoc exactly where I expected him to be. The 1974 Ford Bronco is no longer under its canvas shroud. The cover has been folded neatly in the corner. Caradoc is lying on a creeper under the chassis, his legs sticking out a heavy industrial flashlight, illuminating the undercarriage. I hear the metallic clink of a wrench against a bolt, a steady, focused sound. "How's the progress?" I ask, leaning against the workbench. The creeper wheels squeak as Caradoc slides out from under the Bronco. He sits up, his face smeared with a smudge of black grease, his eyes bright in the dim light of the garage. He wipes his hands on a rag, the movement deliberate and rhythmic. The brake lines are shot. He says, his voice taking on that technical grounded quality I saw earlier. Most of the rubber has dry rotted. I need to bleed the system and replace the primary cylinders before we even think about the engine. Sounds like a plan, I say. I wait a beat, letting the mechanical talk settle. "Caradoc, I just spoke with Constance. The charges have been filed. He's been stripped of his badge. He's facing several years." Caradoc doesn't celebrate. He doesn't even smile. He just nods once, as if I've confirmed a weather report he already suspected. He's spent so long living with the reality of those crimes that the legal confirmation seems almost secondary to the physical work in front of him. "And your mother?" I continue. "She's not being charged. She's cooperating with the DA. She asked me if she could see you. She's in the kitchen." Caradoc stays sitting on the floor, the rag still in his hands. He looks at me for a long, searching moment, searching for a hint of what I want him to say. But I give him nothing. I remain a neutral observer, a guardian of his autonomy. He looks back at the Bronco, at the rusted metal, the dry rotted lines, and the immense difficult task of making something broken run again. He stares at the vehicle as if he's calculating the torque required to fix a soul. He doesn't speak. He just sits there in the silence of the garage, the weight of the question hanging in the air, like the smell of old oil. Caradoc sits with his back against the Bronco's front tire, his legs stretched out across the oil-stained concrete. He looks up at the exposed rafters of the garage ceiling and doesn't answer right away. In the high-stakes environment of the OR, a delay usually signifies a complication. But I have learned with him that the pauses are where the real answers live. They are the moments where he is sorting through the wreckage of the last year. I wait. I don't check my watch. I simply lean against the workbench and let the silence exist. "Is she getting real help, Grandpa?" he asks finally. He doesn't look at me. "Not just saying she is to please the lawyers. Is she actually doing the work?" "She is," I answer, and I make sure my voice carries the weight of a clinical observation. I've driven her to the sessions, Caradoc. I've seen the way she looks when she comes out. It's the look of someone who has just had a very difficult surgery without anesthesia. She is beginning to face the things she allowed to happen. I've seen the difference. Another long silence follows. The shadows in the garage are lengthening, stretching across the floor like dark fingers. Caradoc picks up a small cotter pin from the floor and rolls it between his thumb and forefinger. "Not yet," he says. The words are quiet but heavy. Tell her not yet, but not never. I'm just not there yet." I can't look at her and not see the hallway in the old house. I can't look at her and not wonder why she didn't hear me. I nod, acknowledging the surgical precision of his honesty. I'll tell her that. He looks at me, then his eyes sharp and intense. Make sure she knows it's not yet and not no. Those are different things, Grandpa. A no is a wall. Not yet is just a long hallway. I'm still walking down it. I haven't closed the door. I just haven't reached it yet. I'll make sure she knows exactly that. I promise. In medicine, we call that a guarded prognosis. It's not a failure. It's a recognition of the time required for the tissue to knit back together. Caradoc turns his attention back to the Bronco. He reaches up and touches the underside of the engine block, his fingers tracing the rusted lines of the machinery. The carburetor is completely seized. It's not just old Grandpa. Water got in there at some point. It's rusted solid. I know, I say, stepping closer. I've known for 11 years. Caradoc pauses, his hand still on the cold metal. He looks at me, his brow furrowed. 11 years. You've had this car sitting in here for a decade, and you knew the heart of it was flooded. Why didn't you fix it? You could have had it showroom ready in a month. I wasn't waiting for a shop, Caradoc, I say, my voice dropping an octave. And I wasn't waiting for the money. I was waiting for the right time. I was waiting for the right person to have the time and the need to work on it. A car like this doesn't just need a mechanic. It needs someone who understands that the process of fixing it is more important than the finished product. Caradoc looks at the seized carburetor, then back at me. I see the realization flicker in his eyes, the understanding that this wasn't an oversight. It was a long-term investment in a future he didn't know he had. The engine was broken so that one day he could be the one to prove he could fix it. The car is the metaphor for everything we have been through. The damage, the neglect, and the slow process of restoration. Can we work on it Saturday? He asks. There's a new note in his voice, a spark of purpose. 7 a.m, I reply. Not a minute later, Rosemary Vance makes biscuits on Saturdays. We eat first. Then we come out here and we start the teardown. We'll need to soak that carburetor in solvent for at least 48 hours before we even try to move the butterflies. 7 a.m. He repeats, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I'll be ready. Caradoc stands up, dusting the grime from his hands onto his jeans. He looks at the Bronco one last time, the rusted fender, the flat tires, the seized engine, and for the first time, he doesn't look overwhelmed. He looks like a man with a blueprint. He reaches for the wall switch and turns off the garage light. We stand in the sudden dimness, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the high windows. Grandpa, he asks as we walk toward the house. When this is all over, the trial, the news, all of it, are we going to be okay? Really okay? I stop at the door and look straight at my grandson. I don't look at him as a victim. I look at him as the man he is becoming, the one who survived the dark and came out with his soul intact. Caradoc. I say, and I put all the certainty of my 40 years of medicine into the words. We are already okay. The safety is established. The predator is gone. Everything else, the healing, the rebuilding, that is just work. And I know how to do work. You know how to do work. We've already done the hardest part. He looks at me for a long beat, then nods. It's the nod of a partner agreeing on a surgical plan. Yeah, he says softly. We know how to do work. We walk into the warm light of the kitchen together. The smell of the evening air lingers, a mix of old oil and new possibilities. The trial is coming, but inside this house the only thing that matters is the 7 a.m. alarm and the seized heart of a 1974 Bronco that is finally ready to be opened. There are things I would have done differently. I have said some of them in conversations with Constance and Denise and Rosalind. But there is one thing I have not yet said out loud to anyone, and I want to say it here, because this is the only place I have recorded everything honestly, without gaps, without softening. In the surgical suite, we call this a morbidity and mortality conference, a clinical egoless autopsy of a procedure to ensure that the next one is cleaner, sharper, more certain. I sit at my desk in the second-floor office. The house is quiet, but it is not the brittle, fragile quiet of a hospital. It is the deep, resonant silence of a home that is no longer hiding a secret. I open the notes on my phone. The list of 44 entries stares back at me, a digital ledger of a year spent in the shadows. I begin to write the final sequence. Entry 45. I account for what was done correctly first. That is the protocol. 9 months of meticulous documentation. The acquisition of the secondary phone in March hidden in the nightstand, which provided the secure line for the final extraction. The leveraging of 40 years of professional relationships, people like Virgil Dunmore and Constance Bellamy, to ensure the law moved faster than the predator. And the 4 seconds of tactical stillness in the Vanderbilt parking structure before I walked into the lobby. Those were the correct moves. They saved 2 lives. But the ledger is not balanced until the errors are named. I gave Caradoc my personal number in March. I told myself then that the timing was right, that the boy was ready to listen. But the truth is, I could have given it to him in September, the very same day I wrote entry 1. I had the resources then. I had the suspicion. I stayed my hand because I wanted the case to be perfect, because I wanted the evidence to be irrefutable before I risked the exposure. Those months between September and March belonged to him. They were months of fear and isolation that I allowed to continue, because I was playing a long game. I cannot give those months back to him. I can only name the failure for what it was, a delay for the sake of strategy over safety. Then there is entry 38. I saw the bruise on Nadine's shoulder in October. It was a faint yellowish mark, partially hidden by the strap of her dress. I wrote it down in the ledger. I noted the date, the time, and her defensive posture when I looked at it. But I said nothing. I told myself I needed more evidence. I told myself that an isolated bruise wouldn't hold up in a custody battle against a decorated detective. The truth is much simpler and much more painful. I had enough evidence in October. I waited longer because she is my daughter, and I did not know how to ask the question without breaking the carefully constructed image of our family. I was a world-class surgeon who could repair a ruptured aneurysm, yet I was a father who was too cowardly to ask his own child who had hurt her. I waited for the evidence to become so overwhelming that the question would ask itself. Writing this is not an exercise in self-punishment. I do not believe in the utility of guilt. It is an unproductive emotion that clouds clinical judgment. This is information. The use of a mistake is not to diminish what was done correctly. It is to make the next correct thing come one step sooner. By naming these errors, I am closing the loop. I am ensuring that the man who walks out of this office tomorrow is not just a strategist, but a man who understands that some things are worth the risk of being wrong early. I finish entry 45 and close the note. I look out the window at Forest Hills. The neighborhood is disappearing into the night, the street lamps casting long amber pools of light on the pavement. For the first time in 16 months, the weight in my chest has shifted from a sharp diagnostic pressure to a dull, manageable ache. At 9:47 p.m., the phone on my desk vibrates. It's not the secondary phone that one has been wiped and placed in a secure safe. It is my regular cell. The caller ID says Nadine. I answer on the second ring. Nadine. Dad, she says. Her voice is steady, though I can hear the remnants of the day's emotional exhaustion. I was thinking about what you said, about the work. I'd like to come over for breakfast tomorrow, before the lawyers call. I check the time. 7:30. Rosemary is making biscuits anyway. We'll be in the kitchen. 7:30, she repeats. I'll be there. Good night, Dad. Good night, Nadine. I hang up and stand in the doorway of my office. I look down the long, dark hallway toward the west wing. There is no sound coming from Caradoc's room. No blue light from a tablet under the door. No rhythmic tapping of a nervous foot. I walk down the hall, my footsteps silent on the rug, and pause outside his room. I don't open the door. I don't need to. I can hear the slow, deep, regular cadence of his breathing. Caradoc is actually sleeping. He is not lying still, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of a patrol car in the driveway. He is not bracing himself for the next tactical encounter. He is actually deeply asleep, a teenager in a safe house, dreaming of a 1974 Bronco and a Saturday morning that is finally his own. Oh, I walk back to my own room. The ledger is finished. The entries are complete. Tomorrow, the trial will begin its slow mechanical crawl through the courts, and the public will eventually know the contents of the smartwatch. But tonight, the only thing that matters is the silence. The operation is a success. The recovery has begun, and for the first time in a very long time, the doctor is going to sleep. Constance calls with the trial date on a Tuesday morning before the dew has fully evaporated from the magnolia leaves. I am standing in the garage watching Caradoc disassemble the Bronco's carburetor. He is working with the focus of someone who has found something to control while everything else in his life remains in the hands of the state. He doesn't look up. He is too busy documenting every tiny brass jet on a magnetic tray. Raymond, Constance says, her voice echoing the neutrality of a veteran litigator. The docket is set. Jury selection begins in 3 weeks. The evidentiary hearing is scheduled for the following Monday. I lean my hip against the workbench, watching Caradoc's steady, grease-stained hands. I'll have the files ready, Constance. The digital logs are backed up. I know you will, she replies. But there's more. Your grandson is going to testify, Raymond. He's waived his right to a closed-circuit deposition. He wants to stand in the well of the court. He wants to look at the jury and at his father. I thank Constance and hang up. I stand there for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. Caradoc is still leaning over the engine bay, his brow furrowed as he struggles with a seized linkage. Was that about the trial? He asks, his voice muffled by the hood. He sets down the wrench with a deliberate click and turns around. He wipes his hands on a black rag, meeting my gaze with a clarity that tells me the boy I brought home from Vanderbilt is gone. I'm going to testify, Grandpa, he says. I decided with Rosalind last week. I just didn't know how to say it to you yet. If I don't say it out loud to people who matter, it's like it almost didn't happen. And it happened. I'm done hiding. I look at him, seeing the steel in his spine. That's exactly right, Caradoc. That is the final stage of the procedure. Constance had told me earlier that Caradoc's testimony combined with the medical evidence and my 44 entries formed the strongest package she had presented in 30 years. When she says strongest, she means the outcome is no longer in doubt. The predator has run out of exits. By mid-morning, the sun illuminates the dust motes dancing in the garage. A car pulls into the driveway, Nadine carrying a carrier with 3 coffees from Frothy Monkey on 12th Avenue South. She stops at the threshold, standing exactly where the concrete meets the asphalt. She doesn't cross the line. She understands the boundary of this sanctuary. Caradoc looks up. He sees her, and for a split second, the air in the garage thins. Then he gives a small, sharp nod. It isn't a hug or an invitation. But he doesn't look away. He acknowledges her as a peer, not a victim acknowledging a guardian. Nadine walks to the edge of the workbench and sets Caradoc's coffee down. She still doesn't step closer than 3 feet. I thought you might need a break, she says softly. The line at Frothy Monkey was long, but I figured you'd want the dark roast. Thanks, Caradoc says. He picks up the cup, the heat a contrast to the cold metal of the engine. The 3 of us stand in the garage, the silence thick, but no longer suffocating. The morning light pours through the door, reflecting off the chrome bumpers. It is a strange tableau, the surgeon, the witness, and the boy who survive standing together in a room that smells of gasoline and espresso. Caradoc turns back to the carburetor sitting on the bench. He pokes at the primary venturi with a screwdriver. We need a new one, Grandpa. The old one is too far gone to rebuild. The internal passages are pitted with corrosion. Even if I soak it for a month, it'll never idle right. I know, I say, looking at the rusted piece. I've known it was a lost cause. How long to get a replacement, he asks. I know where to order a period-correct Holly. I reply, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Caradoc nods his fingers, tracing the rim of his cup. 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, we can wait. We've waited this long to hear the engine start. What's another 21 days? He looks at Nadine, then back at me. He isn't just talking about the car. He is talking about the trial. He is accepting the timeline of his own recovery. Nadine glances at me over Caradoc's shoulder. It is a brief look, one that says everything she cannot say. It says thank you, and I'm trying. I give her a small, almost imperceptible nod. I am not ready to forgive her entirely, but I am ready to be the bridge. She understands. She takes a sip of her coffee, turns, and walks back toward the house. Caradoc watches her go for a second, then picks up the screwdriver again. 3 weeks. he mutters, looking at the empty space on the manifold. Plenty of time to prep the gaskets. I pick up my own coffee. The trial date is set. The testimony is decided. The parts are on order. The operation is moving into its final phase, and as I watch my grandson work, I know the outcome is already written. The heart of the machine is being replaced one bolt at a time. 3 months after the night at Vanderbilt, I am standing in the garage at 7 in the morning when Caradoc appears at the door. He is wearing an old oversized hoodie, and his hair is not yet combed, the defiant, messy look of a teenager who no longer has to look like a soldier. He has 2 coffees from Frothy Monkey in his hands, the steam curling upward into the crisp Nashville air. He doesn't say anything. He just hands me my cup and walks over to the 1974 Ford Bronco, which has become the silent metal heart of our Saturdays. We work in silence for the first hour. The new period-correct carburetor arrived on Thursday, a pristine piece of engineering that looks almost too clean against the weathered manifold. Fitting it in requires a delicate touch, balancing the gaskets, ensuring the linkages aren't binding, and torquing the bolts with the precision of a surgeon closing a chest cavity. Caradoc does most of the heavy lifting. I hold the light and hand him the tools he asks for, playing the role of the surgical assistant in a theater where he is finally the lead. The trial had ended 2 weeks ago. The news cycles have moved on to other tragedies, other scandals. The world has forgotten the 44 entries and the forensic audio. But in this garage, the echoes are finally fading. "It's done!" Caradoc says, his voice muffled as he leans deep into the engine bay, tightening a fuel line. "Yeah," I reply, "it's done." He pulls back, wiping a smudge of grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looks at the engine, then at me. "How do you feel, Grandpa?" "I feel like the procedure is over," I say, leaning against the workbench. "And the patient is stable. How do you feel?" He looks out at the driveway for a long beat. "Like it's done. Just done. Nothing more is needed. We don't need to discuss the sentencing or the way the man's face looked when the badge was officially destroyed. We don't need to recap the testimony or the way the jury leaned forward when the smartwatch audio played in the silence of the courtroom. All of that is external. What matters is the stillness here. Rosemary Vance brings biscuits out to the garage at 8. She carries them on a warmed plate, the scent of buttermilk and honey cutting through the smell of gasoline. She sets them on the workbench, without staying, without asking a single question. She understands with the wisdom of 15 years in this house that this is our time, a sacred hour of mechanical prayer. She gives me a quick knowing look and disappears back toward the kitchen, her footsteps soft on the gravel. Around 10, Nadine stops by. She has her own coffee in hand and wears a scarf against the winter chill. She stands in the doorway framed by the pale morning light, but she doesn't come in further. She has learned to respect the perimeter of the garage. She smiles a real fragile smile that reaches her eyes for the first time in years. Caradoc looks up from the fuel pump and gives her a wave. It's a small gesture, just a lift of the hand, but it is real. It is the bridge we've been building one Saturday at a time. She nods, takes a sip of her coffee and lingers for a moment, just to watch him work before she turns to head back inside. "You think we can actually get this thing running today?" Caradoc asks, looking at the complex web of wires and hoses we've spent months untangling. "I think we can get most things running." I tell him, watching the way he handles the wrench. If we're patient enough, if we're willing to take it apart and put it back together until it's right. Caradoc leans back over the engine, murmuring something to himself about the fuel line pressure. I stand still for a moment, not the 4 tactical seconds I used to count out in the Vanderbilt parking structure, but just still. I stand here because I want to, because the winter light coming through the garage door is the kind of light that only comes when things are finally finding their way back to where they belong. It is a quiet, honest light. My mind wanders back to the beginning. I think about the call at midnight that started the final phase. I think about the 8 hours and 32 minutes from the moment the phone rang to the moment the emergency order was signed by a judge who didn't care about the time. I remember the secondary phone hidden in my nightstand, the piece of paper slid across a kitchen table in the dim light of dawn, and the weight of the digital recordings in the interior pocket of my jacket. I spent 40 years learning how to fix the human body, but I spent the last year learning how to protect a soul. I look at my grandson, who is now whistling a low, tuneless song as he adjusts the idle screw on the new carburetor. He is no longer a recording device. He is no longer a witness. He is just a boy who likes old trucks and frothy monkey coffee. He called me at midnight because he had a number that worked, and he believed I would come. That is the whole of it. Everything else, the entries in the ledger, the recordings, on the watch, the court orders, the felony, charges, the long days of the trial. And even this garage on a Saturday morning with the winter light and the 2 cups of coffee, all of it proceeds from that one fundamental fact. He believed I would come. I came. That is enough. That will always be enough. This is a family story I carry with complicated pride. I did what needed to be done, but I waited too long. I saw the bruise on my daughter's arm in October. I wrote it in a ledger and said nothing. I told myself I was being careful and calculated. The truth is simpler and harder to accept. I was afraid. So, hear me clearly, don't be like me. Documentation is not protection. A notebook full of timestamps cannot hold a frightened child in the middle of the night. Your voice can, your presence can. Every family story that ends in survival only does so because someone refused to stay silent for one moment longer. Family betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives in the shadows in a text message that sounds carefully rehearsed in a dinner table where one man answers every question not directed at him. Family betrayal grows strongest in the dark, fed by fear and the hope that things will somehow sort themselves out. But they can't. By the time family betrayal becomes impossible to ignore, it has already taken everything from someone. I'm not a religious man by nature, but I believe God placed that phone number in Caradoc's hands for a reason. I answered when he called. I almost came too late. Don't let that happen. This family story draws inspiration from social issues surrounding domestic violence and child protection. Certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes, but the weight behind every scene reflects realities happening in families across this country every single day. Thank you for staying with me throughout this entire journey. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Raymond's position? If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes.